Since I've been here, several people have asked me the question, why study dolphins? What got you interested in dolphins? And this is, I think, the $64 question. We have 3 peaks of brain evolution in mammals, humans, elephants, and dolphins. And after humans, when you control for body size, dolphins have the largest brains on the planet. So it's a very important question, I think, to answer is what are they doing with those big brains and why do they have them? Why do you have an aquatic mammal that's evolved such a big brain? So if we look to the sort of terrestrial sphere, see what sort of ideas have emerged over the last couple decades, there's 2 general ideas, and one is centered on food. And so look at this chimpanzee in a fruit tree. A chimpanzee lives in a community, and they have a community territory. And so a chimpanzee might need to remember, for example, where its favorite fig tree is and when it bears ripe figs. So they'll have a spatial and temporal map of their food. Another idea is that sometimes they have complex ways to get at their food, so they'll have cognitive abilities to deal with that, such as this chimpanzee on a termite mound using a stick to fish for termites, so sort of complex extractive foraging. But I'd say the idea that's really come to the fore in the last 10 years has been that big brain evolution has a lot to do with managing and negotiating complex social relationships. And here we see Jane Goodall, who is watching complex social relationships in chimpanzees. And I think it's summarized nicely with this quote from one of my former advisors. Individual reproductive success would depend increasingly on making the right decisions in complex social interactions involving self, relatives, friends, and enemies. So in some groups where you're highly dependent on each other, you're also in reproductive competition with each other, and that can lead to some complex kinds of social interactions. This place where I work is in Western Australia. It's called Shark Bay, and I think it has really provided an incredible window into the dolphins world. And I was very lucky to learn about it as I was just finishing my undergraduate career in California and went out there in 1982 and have been going back quite a bit since then. Shark Bay is about 500 miles north of Perth. It's a huge bay, 13,000 square kilometers. It's bisected by this Parent Peninsula. It's a World Heritage Site with the largest seagrass beds in the world, and that is the basis for tons of marine life. Very productive area, and visually arresting as well. And about halfway up on that peninsula, we have this little sand spit here called Monkey Maya. A bit of deeper water comes in, and it's here for a few decades that a few of the dolphins from the surrounding population have been coming in on a daily basis to take fish from people. This is what first got us going out there, because we thought these tame dolphins coming in and taking fish would provide that window to the dolphins world, very much like when Jane Goodall fed some chimps bananas and habituated them to her presence. And we did learn a lot about the dolphins from watching them inshore here, but it was very clear very soon that the real action was offshore, because these dolphins belong to an absolutely huge social network offshore. So this is the beast, the Indian Ocean bottlenose dolphin. If you've seen the ones in SeaWorld or along the East Coast here, these are smaller. They're only about 2 meters, much beautiful too, I have to say. And we watch them from little boats, little 15-foot runabouts in the bay there. And this is how we identify them. You have to be able to see who's who out there, the cast of characters. And they have these little individual identification flags that they wave at us every time they come to the surface. Remarkable differences in shapes and scars of their fins. So we have identified over 1,200 animals in our about 650 square kilometer study area that's on the east side of that peninsula you saw. Now, you never see everybody together there. They live in what we call a fission-fusion society, and that means that they're in little groups, 4 and 5 here, 3 over there, 10 over here, 1 over here. It's very dynamic because they're always coming together and splitting up. Who's that sound like? It's very much like us. We're here in a big group right now. After this, we'll split up and go into little groups and play in your cars and boats, and then you'll get back together for dinner. So very dynamic society. Fun to watch that way. This is probably based a lot on the kinds of food they eat and how they go about getting it. So they eat a huge variety of fish, mostly fish, a few squid, schooling fish, solitary fish, large fish, small fish. They'll chase them on the bottom. They'll catch them as they jump in the air, and they'll even go on the beach in a few cases to get them. What's striking here is that we find individual kind of specializations within the population. And this is a striking example of that. First case of tool use in wild dolphins, mostly females that carry these cone-shaped sponges on their noses, and we think use them to protect their snouts as they grub along in the deeper channels for their prey. Now you think, that's what they're doing with their big brains. Individual foraging specializations, tool use. I don't think so. It turns out individual foraging specializations are quite common in the marine world. We see it in whales and seals. Sea otters have remarkable tool use that is learned from the mother to the offspring. So I don't think that's where the key lies, although it's fascinating behavior. And just to point out, a lot of you think, oh, it'd be really fun to be a dolphin, wouldn't it? You know, don't you wish if you could be any other animal, you could be a dolphin? Well, maybe not. Those seagrass beds, like I say, they're the basis for a lot, including big tiger sharks. Over 70% of the dolphins in our population have bite scars. I don't think that'll be very fun. So this is what I've focused on for the last 25 years, male politics. And I think I'm justified in using the word, as you'll see. They have quite complex alliances. This is a trio of males. So the first sort of important discovery, you know, when we went out in the bay and we're watching this dynamic fission and fusion grouping pattern, we noticed that some males, adult males, form these very strongly bonded and stable pairs and trios. You'd always see the same 2 or 3 males together. And in fact, some of these pairs and trios have lasted for 20 years. So what were the males doing in these groups? Well, there was one trio of males that matured. They came into the beach on a regular basis, went down to the beach one morning, and they had a strange female with her calf right there in the water with people there. And we thought, well, this female must be terrified. She's not used to people. And indeed she was, because she turned and she rocketed offshore, and they chased, and there was a lot of splashing and some hitting, and they captured her, and they brought her back and basically forced her to stay there with them. And they ended up doing a lot of that. And here's 2 males chasing a female. So this first discovery was not terribly pleasant in terms of the sort of popular image of dolphins, that they form these consortships when a female's calf is about 2.5 years old. The calves stay with the females a long time. She'll start cycling, come into estrus again, become attractive to the males, and they'll try to form these consortships with the females, and they're often initiated and maintained with aggression. They're basically, we think, trying to monopolize the female so that she can't mate with other males. We think that her strategy is to mate with lots of different males. Here's a trio of males behind the female. And here's a close-up of the blowhole of the dolphin. They actually use a particular vocalization. If we'll hit that now, you can hear it. This keeps the female close. That popping sound, that's 2 males popping. That's actually a threat vocalization, and they back it up, and it keeps her close by. But they also have to impress the female. And these synchronous displays we occasionally see in this herding context are just absolutely amazing. I've never gotten jaded watching these. The female you can barely see. She's just underwater here. These 2 males are performing, they're lying on their sides, and they're synchronously bobbing their heads up and down. Now, I've never seen this one before. Somebody else took this picture. And the point is, we see synchrony a lot in the animal world. You can have fiddler crabs synchronously wave their claws, or synchronous flashing in fireflies. But the synchrony these male dolphins are doing is creative, and they're innovating, because there seems to be no end to the variety of displays. It's certainly not like they're going, let's do display number 10A, because it's just endless. Here's another one. I mean, you think you're impressed by what the trainers can get them to do in captivity? They do it here. They'll jump and cross in midair, and just every kind of acrobatic synchronous turn you can imagine. Here's the female. The 2 males are doing synchronous belly slaps going in opposite directions. So it really is remarkable. I don't know. Okay. The next discovery was also, we would watch these males, and each of these pairs, trios, had another pair of trio that they spent a lot of time with. Now, that didn't make sense, because they're just competing for access to estrus females, and that seemed to be what they're up to. Then they shouldn't be friends with these other alliances, and yet they'd be, you know, each pair or trio again, you'd see them with another pair or trio, and they'd forage and rest and travel together. So what were they doing? And it turns out they were forming teams of these pairs and trios to cooperate in attacks on other alliances to take their females or to defend against these attacks. Now, this was extraordinary, and I'll explain why. Because both of these alliances, the pairs and trios, which we call the first level alliance, and the teams of pairs and trios, which we call the second order alliances, occur within the social network. So if we look at an animal that forms pretty complex alliances like the chimpanzee, and this represents 3 male chimpanzees in a community, and they'll compete for alpha status. And the very complex sort of relationship negotiations go on here as each is vying to get the most suitable other as the alliance partner. So A might be grooming B, so B will be A's alliance partner, but meanwhile C also wants B to be his alliance partner, so B will groom A, and there's this competition for alliance partners, and they use grooming and stroking to do this. It's a bit of a soap opera. Now, we also have another community of chimps that's next door, and these guys form an alliance against this group. But that's not really that complex, because these are just your enemy. This is just us against them. But imagine though that maybe we had this community of chimps would maybe go over and negotiate a truce with these chimps and say, hey, let's join forces and attack this group. Meanwhile, this group is saying, hey, let's get together and attack that group, and then we can take over their territory and we'll split it. Chimps don't do that. But humans do. This kind of hierarchical nested alliance structure is central to human political organization. If you think of kin factions within villages against each other, village against village, 2 villages cooperating against a third, and we extrapolate that right on up to interactions between nation states. And dolphins also, within a social network now, have 2 levels of alliance formation. And as we'll see, maybe a third. Okay, I think at this point, I actually have the moment of discovery, because when we first saw the second level alliance formation, Barbara Smuts had a video camera on board. She's a primatologist.
Watching a male coalition hurting a female.
Another alliance came in and approached very close but didn't do anything. You know, we thought, this is strange.
It's a younger version.
And then they turned and left. And about a mile offshore, we found them later. They had joined up with another alliance. Then they came into the beach, and they attacked and took the female. And there they go, out northwest.
The kidnappers took off across the bay, with the coalition from the beach in hot pursuit.
Andrew, they got Holyfin. They went in there and stole her. This is like science fiction.
It was the first time Richard had seen 2 coalitions join forces to overpower a third. On another day, he saw a similar situation escalate into a virtual war involving 2 super coalitions. The chase and battles lasted an hour and a half.
Watch out! Neutral! Wow!
This explained why rival coalitions aren't exclusively hostile to each other. It's just good politics.
When you talk about political...
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So my comment there about this is like science fiction is because I realized this is something that simply had not been seen in non-human animals before, so it's very exciting. The relationships between these pairs and trios is very complex, as I'll illustrate here with a sort of a 20-year history. This is a trio of males, chop, bottom, hook, and lambda. In 85 and 86, they were almost always with this trio, Trips, Bite, and Cetus. Too much sun, we give them funny names. And meanwhile, this was actually 2 tight pairs that were almost hard to tell who was in the pairs. But what happened in 86 is this guy disappears. And then these 3 would join up with this trio, and the funniest thing would happen, everybody would turn and line up against poor Patches and attack him. And he disappeared. And so then what happened the next couple of years, this pair that was left now moved in on their relationship, and you'd either see these two alliances together or these two, but you no longer saw those two together. And then in May of 1989, these two males disappeared, and bottom hooked joined real notch and high to form a new trio. And then in 1990, this trio disappeared, and they took up with this other pair, which had matured now. And then evidently, you know, Pointer, they got talking there with bottom hook, and they decided they're better off as a pair, and they kicked Lucky out. And at first, when this happened, you could see Lucky sort of trailing along behind the group for a while. Then bottom hook was old, and he died, and they got back together briefly. Because then Pointer decided he was better off in a trio with these three, and they booted poor Lucky again. But Lucky then took up with a group of males that were maturing, and he was part of a group of 7. Yay, Lucky! But then they kicked him out too. So we blew it, we jinxed him because we named him Lucky. All right. So dolphin social behavior. They're negotiating all these bonds by, like the chimps will groom and stroke each other. Dolphins pet and stroke each other. They have a lot of social sex. I mean, it's fun to watch dolphins. And I don't know what that is. But also the synchrony comes into play here. When you're watching two alliances together, you know, usually they're two buddy alliances. Members of each alliance will surface synchronously with members of their own alliance. But the occasions where we see one male from each of the two alliances get side by side and start becoming synchronous is when they're excited about a female consort. So maybe there's a potential conflict of interest and a need to reinforce the bonds a little more there. Okay, a case of serendipity. Here we were. We knew we had this 2 levels of alliance structure, that we had these very strong, stable, long-term associations of pairs of males and trios of males, and each pair or trio had 1 or 2 other alliances that they were pals with, but usually only saw 2 together at a time. That might be 4 to 6 adult males and maybe their female consorts. So we also knew that when we watched them in the bay that they might separate out, and they seemed to coordinate their movements over quite large distances. So one would turn, then the other would turn, and one would turn. We thought they must be doing that with vocalizations. So we decided to do a study on that, and we went there with 2 boats, and we decided, well, if we're going to do this, we need to expand our study area. We need to include more alliances, so we need to go find some new groups. So we go out there one day, and we come across this huge group of 14 adult males, and it's very surprising, because how can there be 14 males together, and a fight doesn't break up? They're just resting. They're just hanging out there together. And we watch them for a while, and we see that, in fact, there's several trios there that have female consortships going. And that's really interesting, this huge group. We have to come look at them some more. A week later, we come back. There they are again, all 14 males. And then they start to separate a little bit, and we see that they're in some trios. But now the females that were there before are gone, and to our great surprise, the composition of the trios had changed. And that was completely different, because the other guys, the pairs and trios, were stable, 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 and here they weren't. So this was serendipity. We started to study something else and ended up discovering this group, which became to be known as the Super Alliance. And we watched them a lot for 2 years and found an incredibly complex social structure within this one group of 14 males that's nested within this larger social network. And so, yes, they switched alliance partners between consortships, but there was a lot of variation in who did that much switching. And they had strong preferences and avoidances for whom they wanted to be in an alliance with. And so that got published in Nature and got a lot of attention. But it also meant that we now didn't really know what was going on with alliance formation in Shark Bay, because we had our little stable alliances and we had this big group. So now we had to go back and again expand our study area. 650 square kilometers. And we went to document, and we did, over 6 years, the alliance affiliations of over 100 adult males in the Bay. And we found other large groups with variable sort of trio formation. We found they had larger ranges. And we have hints of even, I think pretty strong hints, of actually a 3rd level of alliance formation. because we have clear relationships between these second-order alliances, and we have seen battles involving 3 of these big groups. It's kind of hard to tell who's supporting who, and there's 25 males chasing and fighting around the place, though. So, dolphin intelligence. Obviously, we're seeing incredibly complex social relationships of a kind that has not been described outside of our own species, and that's very exciting. But I think the future is even more exciting now that we have as a basis described alliance affiliations among over 100 males. This is cool. Now I have 99 more minutes. Bonus. Says right there. Studies on the ecology, cognition, and communication. We have this, there's no other population of anything, dolphins or any other species, where you have this kind of setup with known alliance affiliations of over 100 males that we can start to look at and get a lot more information on what's going on in these big dolphin brains. That's it.